great pleasure to introduce Dr. Eluned Lewis from QinetiQ, who is going to talk to us about the development of military personal armour through song titles. So this could be very interesting. So, Eluned?
Okay, I'm sure no one can see me because lecterns are normally taller than me, so apologies. Thank you everyone for sticking with me. I appreciate this is the graveyard shift, but I am absolutely delighted to be here, and thank you for the kind invitation and for welcoming me to, wow, what a fun community you have, so thank you very much. No one really knows me here, which is possibly a good thing. And something I used to do when I was feeling blue was to write songs or write musicals just to keep myself amused or to keep myself free from work-related depression, maybe. So I wrote DE&S the musical. It's a hoot, okay? Absolute hoot. So tonight I'm going to sing you my presentation. So cue the music. Luckily I'm joking. I know I'm Welsh. I know. I haven't had anything to drink, so I only sing when I've had a couple of drinks, because that's when I think I can sing. Anyway, we probably will be able to sing it, because what I've decided to do is to give a little bit of a nod to where we are. So we're in Liverpool, famous for lots of different things, but the Beatles. So let's go through my story, perhaps, through song titles. Some of the song titles you may be familiar with, some of them you may not be familiar with, but please trust me, Google later if you have to. These are all Beatles song titles. And a nod to your theme for ASEC this year, which is embracing the new opportunities. So I thought it was quite relevant, seeing as the Beatles have actually digitally remastered now and then. So taking an old song and embracing the new opportunity that is AI. So, the songs and the themes. I'm not going to read them all out to you, but I'm afraid I did mention that I like writing musicals. I also like writing a bit of poetry. So, I'm afraid I like the rhyming word. So here I am to speak at your event after a message was sent during your Inkosi Hawaii week. Am I correct? Alas, we are not in Honolulu. We are in Liverpool, Samer. And last time I walked these cultured shores, Boaty McBoatface was being built over there. I'm not sure of my logistics, but here somewhere. So let's keep it fun, and I won't keep you too long. I'll just match my themes to a Beatles song. So hello, goodbye. I'm not going to go through my biography. If you want to read, you've seen potentially the conference paraphernalia. I have spent 20 years in the area of personal protection, 18 of those in MOD, and quite recently joined potentially the dark side, which has actually become the light side, QinetiQ. I've really, really enjoyed my career to date. I've led some fantastic work. I've been expert witness at boards of inquiry and inquests from killed in action personnel in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've had some fantastic operational deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, and Kuwait. And I think when you do so many different things in your career, you build up some fantastic experiences, meet some fantastic people, and are able to do some fantastic things. So I'm very, very grateful for where I am today, and that is notwithstanding being part of a community that is probably dwindling, i.e. the personal armour community. So, a day in the life. What's the purpose of personal armour? So I hope everyone's taking notes and not drunk too much, because there's going to be a quiz at the end to see if everyone's paying attention. So the purpose of personal armour It's to keep you alive. It's to prevent mortality. But in recent years, there's been a more of an appreciation, really, that personal armour also prevents injuries that cause long-term morbidity. So we're trying to do a lot of things with a few different pieces of materials. But there is a trade-off, and being that there's many systems engineers in the room, you will understand that there are trade-offs between different elements in your systems. And for us in personal armour, it's between the level of protection, so what does it stop, and what is the burden, so what is the encumbrance on the wearer. And that burden might be, sorry, I've gone ahead now without meaning to. That burden might be thermal burden, it might be weight, it might be lack of situational awareness. There may be a lot of different things that encompasses that burden. It's the last line of defence in the survivability onion. So when everything in the survivability onion has failed, personal armour is the only thing left to save you. Is everyone aware of the survivability onion? Hands up if you haven't heard about it. Okay, I'm going to briefly say it's a method that is described for survivability, and I'll talk briefly about the layers of those onions, so don't be there, so don't be in that situation. So you're not going to get hit or injured or killed if you're not there. So don't be there, don't be seen. What you use, like deception, camouflage, etc. Don't be hit. Well, either duck or, whatever the situation is. So don't be there, don't be seen, don't be hit, don't be penetrated, don't be killed. So the personal armour is your last line of defence there in the don't be killed. It's not there to hold you together if you've been blown up or shot. That's a fallacy. It's there for a very specific reason, and there's lots of different things that we have to do in order to ensure personal armour is fit for purpose. So these things that we have to do, what's the threat? What are you trying to protect against? Is it high-velocity rounds? Is it fragmentation? Is it low-velocity rounds? What structures do you need to protect? Do you need to protect your heart, your lungs, your kidneys? It's almost obvious, but it's all these steps that we have to go through in some sort of a systems requirement, if you like. What's the distance from a medical facility? A lot of people don't think that this is relevant, but actually the size of your personal armour plates, for example, is dictated by where you are and how far away you are from a medical facility. Because if you are hit, then we know that within a certain time frame, you can be fixed or not. What materials are used? All of the different types of materials that are used for armour are used for different purposes, and I'll come on to that in a minute. Human factors integration, obviously, is a huge thing. You can't put someone in a box and expect them to operate. It would be ideal if we put protection around everyone and protect them from any potential threat, but that's not feasible, that's not logical, that's not allowing someone to do their job. And then you've got the testing and evaluation. How do you test something? How do you evaluate it in a lab, on a person, on a field trial, etc. So there are very many things to consider. And I just thought I'd break it down really quickly to give you the main headers here. So hard armour, probably heard of that term. That's the ceramic type faced armour that you might hear of. And that's there to provide protection against high velocity rifle bullets, whether it's police or military threats. Soft armour then, so the flak jacket type, that's generally there in military terms to protect against perforation of fragmentation. And then you've got helmets, very similar to the soft armour, but laminated and moulded at high temperature into a different shape. So you would then see some sort of hard armour hybrid, face and eye protection. So there's lots of different types of protection that we have to consider, and each types of material combinations are used for different types of threat. So you might have one system, so a helmet, body armour, pelvic protection, hard plate. All of these are combined, but have different levels of protection and have different threat requirements. So it's not quite as simple as one may think. So come together. No man is an island. And I know that's probably an outdated term now, but it's very true. But no one can produce a system, design it, test it, evaluate it, think about what it has to do, think about the human factors, etc., without being in some sort of team, being in some sort of collaborative environment. And here I have a couple of examples. This is I have to take a deep breath before saying this, military genital urinary group that I worked in, which will become obvious when I start talking later on about pelvic protection. The middle here is the forensic support team that I worked with when we were conducting autopsies of those, unfortunately, that were killed in action during conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan. My job there was to evaluate the armour and to determine if the armour had met its specification. And here is another team. This is my multidisciplinary body armour coverage analysis team. So they're all very snappy titles that we come up with here. But basically, these are only a snapshot of some of the teams that have to come together to do all this fantastic work. And the collaboration is between scientists, engineers, clinicians, procurement teams, industry, academia, users. I will have left someone out, I know I will have, but it's one of those things that you have to have these people working together in order to produce something that meets the user's requirements. But the developments in personal armour over time, we've been very fortunate in defence in that we've been able to act positively and act on a change in threat or injury pattern, hence developing the armour at pace. And you'll see what I mean in a moment. So yesterday, these are the systems that have developed through time from the enhanced combat body armour that was introduced prior to the Gulf conflict in 1991, a waistcoat type armour system with hard plates where you slide in around the heart area up here. ECBA was issued when UK forces entered Iraq back in 2003. And something that I noticed as part of the autopsy work I was conducting, and also combat clinicians noted, was as the campaign developed, we were noticing a significant amount of injuries to the neck, the arm, and the underarm, both from high-velocity rounds and from fragmentation injuries. So, guess what? It's not rocket science. We provided some neck and arm protection. Integral initially looks very crude, hated by the troops, hated, but provided that protection, and it was for a very specific reason. It was for a very specific operational role. It was for top cover sentry, so when you're poking out the top of armoured vehicles, or when you were standing sentry in a Sanger, for example, when you didn't need to move around or be agile. So then that moved somewhat from the Elvis suit, as it was colloquially called, into the Osprey system, recognising that we needed the ability to remove the collars and the brassards. But also part of the work with the autopsies and the clinicians was noting that a lot of injuries were sustained to the area that was around the enhanced combat body armour plate, therefore pushing us towards creating a plate that's double the size effectively and changing the threat as well. So there's been a lot of enhancements. We've included side plates, we've included bespoke carriers to carry these side plates, because actually the innovation of the user is something that drives a lot of the developments. Further hard plates, for example, a couple of guys were sadly injured in Iraq, injured to the flank, and their colleagues, their friends were feeling a bit vulnerable, so they just took the plates that they had and slid them down the side of their body armour. So you'll see on here, there is an ability to take out the plates and to change. So that is a further development that was carried out then because of the user need. The Pelvic protection system, that's another enhancement to the Osprey system, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So this was kind of my this was my project, this was my baby, Saving Ryan's Privates. You can read what's on the slide. It's a bit obvious why we possibly introduced pelvic protection, but there was an increase in the number and severity of injuries to the genitourinary system. So guys were having their testicles blown off, their penises blown off, their anuses blown open, and I spent a lot of time trying to convince senior military personnel that we needed to provide protection. It seems like a no-brainer. I mean, I'm looking around the room, there's mostly men here who would like to keep their testicles. You know, it's not a hard question to ask, but you'd be really surprised at how hard it was to convince senior military personnel because they just didn't like the words. There's no way I can make it sound better than what it is. So we did go through a process where we looked at different options and decided on this silk-based underwear. Never thought I'd issue silk underwear to the armed forces, but hey, you know, we can all have a dine out. Colloquially called the blast boxers, and was intended for everyday use. And it was very popular, very comfortable, very popular. I was taken aside, as an aside, by my boss, who was really upset at the time, and it's not the boss that's in the room, so I don't know where you are, Phil, but this is not you. When this project that I colloquially called Saving Ryan's Privates, I got taken to one side and said, I'm sorry, Albert, this is really, really inappropriate. Saving Ryan's Privates is actually a pornographic film, and you need to be a little bit sensitive about what you're doing. So imagine my horror when I had to educate him and say, actually, that's Shaving Ryan's Privates. But, you know, let's not split hairs. I had to Google it, not at work. So we introduced Tier 2 pelvic protection, which was then a further level of protection that was effectively a nappy that was worn over the combat trousers and rolled up at the back when it wasn't in use. Called the combat codpiece in the end. And it's fine if people want to associate it with a positive effect. That's exactly what we wanted. When I was out in Afghanistan, I spent months going around the bases, educating the troops from private soldier to senior commander on this protection that was coming in. Because one of the things that the troops were getting frustrated about was the fact that they didn't have enough training or education before new equipment was arriving. So I was on my one-woman mission to save Ryan's privates, effectively. And it's obvious when you speak to them, you know, do you want to protect? Yes, we do. Well, wear the kit. So they did. I did the largest in-theatre trial, and I got responses back from over 500 people for the Tier 1 pelvic protection, over 350 responses to the Tier 2 pelvic protection. So I could actually use that as evidence to further procurement and to show absolutely this is something that we need. But boy, it was hard, no pun intended. Trying to convince people of this need for this protection and then trying to convince the need to fund this protection was hard. And I did start to feel that I was going nuts. And that's where your grammar comes in. The difference between feeling you're nuts and feeling you're nuts. And once you've got the message across to the youngsters who don't even think about this when they're 18, 19, 20 years old, it's really important. And I'm sticking with the theme of nuts. This is one interesting piece of work that I also got involved in because I was really worried that issuing pelvic protection in the heat of Afghanistan, covering the testicles for potentially a very long time, could have a detrimental effect on creating sperm. Because your testicles hang outside your body for a reason, right? It's to have them at an optimum temperature. So hooking them up to Kevlar, aramid, pelvic protection, is it good for you? Don't know, but I wanted to find out. Luckily, there were combat medics and professors, and I was going to say he's a sperm expert, but that comes out really badly. But he actually is a sperm expert. He is he's a fertility expert in Birmingham that I worked with. And I wanted to make sure that this wasn't going to be a thing. So another thing that I have to convince people of, okay, what do you need to do? I need to get some volunteers to provide some semen samples and blood samples. Oh, right, who are you going to get to do that? Well, paras or Marines, I'm guessing. They'll probably be up for it. And they were. I was very surprised at the uptake for this particular trial. And in fairness, the Royal Marines were happy to donate their sperm. I'm sure they had a lot of practice beforehand, but it was very important that they did regularly masturbate. So imagine saying to soldiers, please don't abstain before you donate, because that will ruin the sample. Because what we need is to measure mobility, motility, and all the other aspects that we need to ensure that this is the best possible sample. If you abstain, that's not the best sample. Okay. Then took some blood, because I didn't realise at the time how important blood was, because blood would give us an indication of the level of gonadotrophic hormones. So they're the hormones that produce testosterone that are kept in testicles, and that's what makes men male. And to make it as simple as I can make it, because I'm not a medic, without testosterone, men become more emotional and grow boobs, because they're not having the testosterone that they require in their bodies. So not only is there a chance that these poor young men could lose their testicles, their anuses, their futures, but if they also start to grow boobs and become feminized, this is a pretty big issue, and it's a pretty sensitive one, and it's one I take very seriously. However, the good news is, after all that doom and gloom, there was no adverse effects. Of course, I want to repeat the study, because there were certain volunteers that, would like to resample. So, protecting the future is all about making sure that, the protection we're providing now doesn't have any adverse effects in a different way, because we have to try and think about everything and be sensible. The Christmas tree effect, you saw some of the slides earlier. We kept adding things on to the soldiers during conflict for the best of intentions, to meet different types of threats or different injury patterns. But the Christmas tree effect was what it was termed, because actually we bought piecemeal, or resulted in piecemeal acquisition. And whilst those components were all there to enhance protection, they may not have been fully optimised to our liking. But, we were at war. And you can see here, how much stuff there's potentially involved in personal armour. And don't forget, it doesn't include helmets, because I'm just talking about personal armour here. It doesn't include helmets, doesn't include face protection, doesn't include eye protection, doesn't include the load that they have to carry in their backpack. So, I don't want to keep you too much longer. What I want to say is that we have learnt, we have done very many optimization exercises. For example, the collars. When we were in Iraq and Afghanistan, we had collars that I mentioned earlier that were detachable, but they were never medically optimized. Using data from conflicts, we were able to medically optimize. And when you medically optimize something using data, it's good, right? You know, we have an opportunity to show this is the data, this is how to make something better, and it increases wearability, it increases confidence in the kit when you're showing the soldier that you're continually trying to improve their equipment. The Virtus body armour system then came in 2015, and this is something that came in using all of the lessons that we'd learnt from procuring Osprey and all of the additional accoutrements, if you like, that Osprey came with. So the one thing I want to mainly draw out is that the Virtus and the Virtus STV is a scalable tactical vest. It's unique compared to previous armours because it's not fitted like previous armours. It's not NATO stock size, chest and height anymore. It's torso size, and that's due to some of the work that was conducted to show the relationships between internal organs and external anthropometry. And height and chest measurements don't provide the optimum area of coverage when it comes to body armour. And if you think about it, it's obvious. Some of us have long legs and short torsos. Some of us have the opposite. So why would a standard size armour provide the optimum coverage? Little things that we did that made a huge difference was changing the vest opening styles to improve access for treating injuries. So the ECBA, as I mentioned earlier, was a front opening and a waistcoat style. That was very difficult to remove from individuals when they were injured. So Osprey was introduced with a side opening and a tabard style, which was then easy to access. Unless, and I'm sure there are probably ex-military in the room, who taped up their shoulders with the green tape, so completely took away from why we had a side opening and a tabard style. But again, probably due to education and lack of training from our part when we were issuing the equipment. But now Virtus is a side opening, it's a tabard style and has a quick release system. And for those of you who don't know what a quick release system is, you pull a pin and the armour falls off, but you can actually reassemble it very quickly if you require. So again, more Virtus optimization, so looking to use medical data to make things smaller, make them better, make them more usable. So this is just an example of how we then modified the Virtus brassard, so the arm protection. And using new medical technology, we were able to then demonstrate why we need to reduce the length of the brassard, which then in turn reduces weight, thermal burden, etc. And we continue to optimize. We use user feedback. We exploit new evidence. We do as much as possible to take feedback from every source effectively. Obviously, not all the changes can be manifested, but there are very good reasons to do some changes. One of the things that's on the slide here is a new tri-service anthropometric survey that's delivering soon. We haven't done, so Defence hasn't conducted an anthropometric survey of the services since 2006-07. So effectively buying new equipment using old data. So embracing the new opportunities. I'm trying to use the theme here. We need to keep pushing forward and making sure that we exploit new opportunities and don't just get stagnant. As you can see here, we have optimized hard plate coverage, and this is by linking internal anthropometry to external anthropometry. If you want to know more about it, I can tell you about it, but I just wanted to show it that it's something that we are actively doing. There's a lot to think about when you're designing armour. There's a lot I can talk about that I'm not going to, but there's a lot to consider. Also, anthropometry. I've mentioned that lack of representative data, but the lack of data on women is even worse. And this is partly why I pushed so hard for this anthropometric survey, because effectively we were invisible women. And if you haven't read this book or haven't heard of this book, please, please, please look it up, because this is a fantastic, I don't want to call it novel because it's a bit more than a novel. It just shows how much data from anthropometry to car seats to toilets that don't consider women at all. We're ignored completely from data sets. And this book effectively spearheaded the Army's thinking, not my research, not anything I'd been working on for 15 years, but a book coming out helped them to see the light, if you like. But women are not small men. It's my mantra. And they're not. You can't just issue smaller sizes of something to women and expect to fit. We have boobs, we have hips, and we have to have equipment that fits. Because if it doesn't fit, it doesn't provide the optimum protection. So, we did issue some smaller sizes of Virtus, and we did effectively do a token gesture, but we have to continue these efforts to address the fact that women are left out, even though women can actually fight on the front line. Well, let's give them kit that fits. It's not difficult. So, last 10 to 15 years has seen significant improvements, not just in the armour that's issued, but the ability to calculate area of coverage on a representative 50th percentile model. It's given us the ability to provide computerized calculations and visualizations of how you can see your armour covering your organs. And it's been a bit of a journey from here, which looks a bit rubbish now, but was literally state-of-the-art back in 2005 to where we are today. And things develop. As more things come out, more things need to be used and developed and implemented by MOD. So what? What are the benefits to the user? Because we're not all doing this for any particular reason except to make life better for the user. And yes, there are many benefits. So reduced mass, thermal burden, fit, interoperability, integration, and so on. So our development of armour is not something that we're doing because it's fun. It's because it improves the efficiency and the ability of the soldier to do their job. So don't let me down. It's coming towards the end, you'll be pleased to hear. No one's yawning. I can't see anyone yawning yet, so that's a good sign. But what does everyone want to know? Does armour work? Does it actually do its job? And we have failed quite dismally in our ability to collect information on whether armour does its job. We're very good at saying where armour can be better, but not a lot of work has been done to prove that armour is actually effective. I'm going to leave that up on the slide so you can see, but there is evidence, and there is a big push towards improving this. But because I go back to the collaboration, there has to be a collaboration, and things like this normally fall through the cracks, unfortunately. But impetus has ramped up a bit recently due to what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening in Israel at the moment, and you can see why it's important to understand if your armour works. There's a little bit on pelvic protection, a little bit on where an observational study showed that there's a decrease in odds of sustaining a genital injury if you're wearing pelvic protection. But they didn't quite go far enough for me because they didn't actually look to match the medical data with the returned pelvic protection from theatre. So I went out to the US to do this exact study where I forensically examined all the pelvic protection that were involved in a IED-related incident and matched that with the medical data. If there are any US citizens in the room, it takes a very long time to get approval to do anything in the US. I thought it was hard in the UK, but it's 10 times harder in the US. But fortunately, very collaborative and very helpful. It just takes time to leap over all those hurdles. I actually thought I was Colin Jackson by the end of my trip, but clearly I'm a little shorter. So I got to meet the Queen. Yay! We talked earlier on my table about my brushes with royalty. So this is a brush with royalty. So thank you to the Queen for hosting an amazing dinner after an award ceremony. So I'm coming to the end, you'll be pleased to know. And I want to play you a video because I think this sums up why I do my job.
In central Helmand, the CO of the Parachute Regiment's 2nd Battalion joins other senior British and Afghan officers for a briefing as his unit's biggest operation of their current tour gets underway. But less than 24 hours later, Andy Harrison would himself become a casualty after this already decorated Colonel Courage was wounded single-handedly routing a suspected Taliban bomb team. This is the area where he narrowly escaped death, giving chase to the insurgents. It's a major supply artery for ISAF and much used by civilian traffic, a high-value target for the enemy. Just the day before, Army engineers had blown up an artillery shell which may have been intended as part of a roadside bomb.
Early next morning, the Lieutenant Colonel was travelling in a vehicle like this, part of an armoured convoy, when in the darkness he saw what looked like a Taliban bomb team at work at the side of the route. Leading from the front and barely waiting for the vehicle to stop, he raced after them. They responded with a grenade and gunfire. One round struck him squarely in the chest plate of his body armour, almost certainly saving his life. He then fell to the ground, wounded by grenade fragments in the thigh and face.
Medevaced to Camp Bastion Hospital the following day, he discharged himself and returned to his patrol base, limping unaided from his helicopter, determined to be back in command. Talking exclusively to Forces News, he denied doing anything exceptional.
I just had a bad morning, and sometimes these things happen, but I'm fine.
How are you healing up?
Great, yeah. I had a small operation, and I'm back in the fray this morning.
I've heard...
So I'm going to cut it really short. This is his plate. So Colonel Andy, as he was then, a week prior to this incident, didn't want to wear his armour because it was too heavy, it was too bulky, and we had a bit of a, I won't say an argument, a heated discussion about showing your troops and showing your youngsters leading from the front, but also showing that you have to set a precedence and you have to set an example. So if you, as the CO, aren't going to wear your armour, your youngsters aren't going to follow. So this was a week after that discussion, and I went to see him in hospital, and he was a very grateful gentleman, as you can imagine. So, quick summary. Personal armour prevents mortality and injuries that cause significant morbidity. I think we've demonstrated that now. Selecting personal armour is dependent on so many different things, and that could be threat, role, anatomical structures that you need to cover. It's a trade-off between the level of protection it provides and the area of coverage and the burden on the wearer. And there's been a significant improvement in personal armour over the last 10 to 15 years, and that's mainly due to the multidisciplinary approach that has been adopted, the ability to act positively on threats or injury patterns. And we were at war. Things seem to work quickly, and money seems to appear when urgent operational requirements are needed. So maybe we're just fortunate. But medical evidence shows that personal armour is effective. You've also seen the video of then Colonel Andy Harrison, now Lieutenant General Andy Harrison, being hit in his plate. But it works, and it obviously provides direct improvements to the military user. So I'm going to use a quote from Stephanie Krolak. Stephanie Krolak was the accidental inventor of Kevlar. I like it when things are invented accidentally and then go on to be one of the best things that has happened. So at least I'm saving lives. There are very few people in their careers that have the opportunity to do something to benefit mankind, and I second that, and I absolutely believe that working in science and technology and engineering in the Ministry of Defence and where I am now is an absolute privilege. So thank you very much for your attention.
Hi, Al. Thank you very much for that. Phil Savides, so I'm the Financial Director for Foreign Co's UK at the moment. I just wanted to say for the room, I was never your boss, Al. I just wrote your staff report, and because of your credibility and your credentials, that they kind of wrote themselves. So thank you for being a model employee for me. You mentioned that it was difficult for you to convince seniors about what you wanted to do. So I just wanted to kind of have a conversation about how did you convince people that this was the right way to go, particularly when you're at war, and what was going on within Afghanistan and Iraq at the time. That must have been really difficult. So I'm intrigued to hear about how you convinced and influenced people.
Thanks for your question, Phil. Much appreciated. Yes, it was really difficult, and I'm going to say one controversial thing, which is probably I wasn't helped by being a woman. So going into a room full of crusty old brigadiers, forgive me, that's probably offensive, trying to say that you need to protect someone's testicles, penis, etc. They just looked at me like I was an alien, frankly. And it goes back to the collaborative approach. You know, here's the evidence, here's how many people are being injured, and here's the impact of what that injury is going to be for young men who don't even know that this is something that they might face. So let's be proactive. And I think what convinced them in the end was to say, the Americans aren't doing this. If we do it first, we're world leaders. And actually it worked, because one of the first incidents we had with someone wearing pelvic protection and being in an incident was a multinational operation of US troops and UK troops, and the difference in injury patterns were absolutely remarkable. And literally a few days later, the Americans bought 128,000 sets from the Brits. And I think it's being ahead of the game, it's knowing your onions, but persistence as well. My brother has always said to me, you know, you're either really stupid or persistent. And I'm probably both. But when I passionately believe in something, I think someone has to listen. And young men need this protection. And finally, they listened. Hopefully that answers your question.
Hi. You mentioned the challenges in having up-to-date data in terms of, I can't remember the term you used, but so on. But I just wondered, with the development of microelectronics and sensors and that sort of thing, whether any consideration has been given to putting sensors on body protection such that when an incident occurs, some good data could be received on the nature of what was hit and where and that sort of stuff. I don't know whether that's ever been considered.
Absolutely, yes. Okay. So there's many studies been conducted to do exactly this, to look at, peak overpressure, to look at impact of bullets, being in a blast, particularly mild traumatic brain injury. Was a huge thing for the US, more than the UK, come 8 to 10 years ago. And that's what the US started doing, was to put probes and strain gauges in helmets and try to measure the overpressure. The problem is you don't know what you're measuring, and you can't link that overpressure to any particular injury mechanism, and that's where everything kind of fell over. And it's the same with us. We can collect so much data, but until we know how to use it and what to do with it, it's almost sat in a box doing nothing. But there are other sensors. So there's biosensors that we've been looking at for, monitoring people's blood pressure, temperature, everything like that. That's medical monitoring, and that's something that the military medics have looked at a lot. There's a lot of ethical issues with doing that. They even started talking about having, little chips, microchips, so we could actually evaluate what someone was involved in any sort of incident. But I don't know anyone who can interpret the data. I think they're way further forward now than they used to be. But it's a bit like in Iraq and Afghanistan. We used to collect so much data on blue force tracking, of pattern setting, etc. But what do we do with it? We need the AI, I think, to help us to unlock that data. And I think that's something really important that's coming up. So really good question. Thank you.
Tim Kirby, Edinburgh Systems. I've found quite a few of the companies making body-worn equipment are still using some old 1950s and 1960s models of typical male soldiers. And that's putting off some of the men of taking certain roles, but almost excluding all the women. Mm-hmm. Are you using some of the data that you're gathering for body-worn armour to look at the ergonomics for other military equipment?
So the anthropometric data set that's being currently collected, QinetiQ is actually going around 15 bases as we speak from tri-service, so starting with the Royal Marines, Army, and then RAF. That data is not just for armour, but we recognise that that data, when it's exploited, has huge possibilities, from vehicles to fighter jets to, everyday cubicles, even bed spaces in T-26 carriers, because the data doesn't exist. So the data that's currently being used for pretty much everything, and that's military and civilian, is out of date. But someone needs to fund it. And that was the fight I was having. Yes, okay, no one's funding it, but we should, because it's the right thing to do. And then that data can be exploited as widely as possible and as freely available as possible once it's available. And that's very soon. So watch this space. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Eluned, that was brilliant.